UCD School of Agriculture and Food Science research seminar on hybrid meat products, fad or future. Today is also International Women's Day, and as it happens, we have two amazing women speakers this afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our speakers, Dr. Simona Grasso from our very own UCD, and Dr. Alissa Nolan, who joins us from UMass in Amherst. Simona is going to be speaking first, followed by Alissa. Dr. Simona Grasso is a food scientist by background. She has a first-class honours degree and an MSc in food science from the University of Catania in Italy, and a PhD in meat science from our very own UCD here in Ireland. She has worked for the food industry in various roles, including new product developer, food technologist, and auditor. She's been awarded and successfully led several European projects with both industry and academic partners. Simona is passionate about healthier meat products and the valorization of byproducts. She's been involved in the development of hybrid meat products and in upcycled foods, as well as exploring consumer attitudes towards these new foods. So Simona, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Emma, for the introduction. I'll just go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, perfect. Can you all see it? Yeah. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Simona Grasso, and thanks, Emma, for inviting me for this quick talk. I will be talking for about 20 minutes or so on hybrid meat products. We'll try to understand whether this might be a fad or a future. I'll let you decide. So I'm a lecturer and assistant professor at the UCD School of Agriculture and Food Science, and I've been working on hybrid meat products for the past few years, both in my time at the University of Reading in the UK, and I'm continuing this work here in UCD now. So there's several issues around meat consumption, and for several reasons, consumers are somehow stepping away or trying to limit their meat intake. This could be for various reasons. A lot of people do so for health reasons, others for environmental reasons, and another for welfare. So regardless of the possible motivations behind these meat consumption changes, we understand that consumers are trying to change their diets. But how easy is it to do so? There is a study that was actually almost 10 years ago now. It was run by the Humane Research Council in the US, and this was done on a big number of American adults. And this study found that actually the majority, 5 out of 6 people who became vegans or vegetarians, then eventually returned back to their meat eating habits. So why is that? Several barriers were mentioned. One of them, probably the most important, was taste. So people had cravings or they were bored with their food options. Another reason was convenience, cooking skills. So they knew how to cook meat and meat products, but they didn't have alternatives at hand that were plant-based. And also our societies in general, which are quite meat-centric. So their diets made them look different. Now, as I said, this survey is almost 10 years ago, so things might have changed by now. But the most important take-home message from this big survey was that it would be more valuable actually to try to concentrate efforts on persuading the majority of the population to reduce meat consumption rather than try to convince only a small percentage of them to try to give up meat completely. So within this context, hybrid meat products have come into the market. So first of all, what are they? They're basically meat products, so it could be anything from a burger to a sausage or a chicken nugget. And in these meat products, a portion of the meat has been partially replaced by plant-based ingredients. Now, this is a very general definition. Plant-based ingredients could be anything. So it could be a whole food. So it could be a chickpea, it could be a vegetable, it could be a fruit, it could be a mix of everything, okay? The advantage of hybrid meat products is that they could be used as a sort of bridge, because there are obviously meat products, there are meat-free products, but there are some people who find it quite difficult and quite hard to basically move from a meat-centric diet where they eat, a lot of meat products every day, to a diet, let's say, made of tofu or made of chickpeas. So they find this quite difficult. So the hybrid meat products could actually provide convenience, and they could allow consumers to continue using these meat products as they would normally do, without having to develop new recipes, or having to upskill, or having to do a cooking course, or having to change massively their eating habits. So this is basically the reason behind hybrid meat products. I will now go through a couple of examples of products that have entered, especially the UK market, who had the biggest tradition from the start. So Aldi was actually the first retailer who launched hybrid meat products back in 2017. I put this here because it was quite interesting, the fact that he had a backlash on social media. So he ended up on several newspapers, because some people actually said, what is this product? They couldn't understand what it was about. And again, it's 6 years ago. So if we think about, the fact that things might have changed since then. But basically, some consumers complained that either you're a meat eater or you're not. They could understand this concept, and because of this negative social media attention, basically this product was quite swiftly removed from the shelves. Then in 2018, another retailer entered the hybrid meat product market, and this time Waitrose. So quite up class, quite expensive products. And in this case, it was up to 35%. It could be a mix of either fruit, vegetable, or pulses. And again, this was targeting consumers looking to reduce their meat intake. Then other retailers followed, as it normally is custom. So you see there, Sainsbury, they pushed the plant-based inclusion to 50% this time. So they developed this range of Love Meat and Veg with 50% meat, 50% veg. Again, for flexitarians rather than vegans. Then we have Tesco. Tesco also developed a range. This time the message was slightly different. They wanted to basically address cooking and making scratch cooking easier. For example, you see there on the right-hand side, they had a mince that was basically a mix, obviously, of beef together with carrots and onions. And they were saying that basically you don't need to buy your vegetables separately. You can actually just buy these mince and you can just put it in your pan. It already has its vegetables inside. And also it highlights vegetables as flavor enhancers, as ingredients that give sweetness to home cooked dishes. So it was a slightly different angle that Tesco took. And then finally, just mention Marks & Spencer. They also launched their own range in 2020. They also took a slightly different angle because they basically launched their range as providing one of your 5 a day per portion, which is quite a good message. And again, vegetables here are used as healthy ingredients, flavorful compounds. So more veggies, more flavor. And then again, your one of your 5 a day is quite an important message there. So I'll go over now some studies that I started to do on these hybrid meat products, because I saw that there were all of these products that had been launched, but actually there wasn't any work from an academic point of view. So I went onto these websites. As I said, Waitrose had its own range. Sainsbury had its own range. So what I did was I just looked at publicly available data. So I went onto the website. I downloaded the reviews that were left by consumers, and these were obviously on different products and from different retailers. And I came up with this database. And I wanted to somehow analyze this. So I wanted to make some sense out of the comments that people left. So I came up with this spreadsheet. I had all of the data there. And I wanted to understand whether there were some particular words or some particular concepts that were associated to these products by people who either liked or disliked the products, and whether there were some particular drivers for these likes or dislikes. So obviously I had no idea how to do this because I'm a food scientist by background, so I wasn't, I'm not an expert on words and linguistics. So I got help from a colleague back in Reading, Sylvia, who obviously does this, and is basically her expertise. So I asked for her help to analyze these texts. And from the analysis of these tests, which I won't bore you with the details, but basically the most important element that came out from these analysis was that people really enjoyed and were happy with the taste of these hybrid meat products. So obviously this is something that depends on how each individual product was developed, but actually the fact that these products are considered to be quite tasty, it was quite positive. Then the other teams that came up were the teams of healthiness and convenience. So obviously a lot of families, for example, or mothers with children, they were mentioning that these products would allow them basically to sneak vegetables into their children's diet, and they would just eat the sausages or eat the meatballs without complaints. So they were quite happy about having found them. And the same thing with convenience. So they, people know how to cook meatballs, people know how to cook sausages, and it was quite a straight swap from one product to another. They were quite happy with that. So basically at the end of this little study, we thought, okay, this was interesting. We understood a little bit about, consumers' motivation, but actually there was the need to develop more kind of bigger qualitative and quantitative studies to compare different social demographics, different nations, and try to understand whether things change from one place to another. So at the time, again, at the University of Reading, I applied for UCDAgFood funding, which is a European organization. And in 2020, I secured funding to lead this one-year project, which was on consumer attitudes towards healthier meat products. It was a multi-country study, which covered the UK, Spain, and Denmark. And we also had ABP as an industry partner. And we had different people involved as well in the Reading team. So there was myself as a food scientist, but there was also an expert in economics, there was an expert in focus groups, and so on and so forth, because multidisciplinarity is quite important in this type of projects. So this was the plan, and the plan was to basically do co-creation throughout. So develop these healthier meat product concepts with consumers using workshops and focus groups at the start of the year. Then the idea was to then test these concepts with big online surveys across the 3 different countries that were involved. And the idea was to manufacture these concepts into basically prototypes that then would have been subjected to sensory analysis and consumer tasting. Now, obviously, 2020 was the year of COVID, so the plan had to slightly change from what was originally on the project. So basically, we ended up doing much more online work than we wanted. So obviously, for example, the focus groups, we were quite swift at changing our methods from a face-to-face workshop and focus group to an online one. So we used Zoom, and then the surveys, we, instead of doing only one, we ended up doing 2, and we ended up doing far less manufacturing than we wanted because it was just difficult to get access to our pilot plants, and also the sensory work was quite limited. So we'll go through now basically the first work that we did, which is the co-creation, just to give you an idea of what we developed. So as I said, there were 3 countries involved, so the UK, Denmark, and Spain. So in each country, we carried out 2 focus groups. So we had 16 participants in each country, so a total of 48. Now we try to capture as much variety as possible. So as you can see there, we got different ages. We try to keep gender balanced. And then we also try to get a mix of light consumers and heavy consumers of meat products to get basically different point of views. And this was basically the structure that we went for. So at the beginning, we just had kind of an introductory stage where we just try to, understand consumers' preferences towards meat products in general. We provided consumers with a definition of meat product. And then in stage 2, we actually started to talk about what the healthier meat product meant. And we gave them definition of healthier meat products. And then finally, we asked them to co-create and co-develop. So we asked people to come into groups and create a new product idea and then present it and then vote the best one. So to make it a little bit fun as well. So in the first stage, was just kind of to introduce the topic and to make sure that people understood what meat products were. So we kind of gave a general definition, which is the one given there on the slide. And this was just to kind of make sure that we were all kind of working on the same concepts. Then on the second part, we started introducing the concept of healthier meat product. So a meat product, which we defined as a meat product that was modified by either reducing or eliminating some unhealthy constituents, and where instead we have introduced some non-meat-based ingredients with health benefits. Okay, so still basically so far there's no mention of hybrid meat product there. We just kept it as general as possible to allow consumers to decide which way they want to go. And then finally, in the last part, consumers were divided into groups, and then they had to basically come up with a new product idea for a specific persona. So in this case, for example, they were given a couple, Emma and Luca. They were given the age range for that, and what was their motivation and what kind of for basically having to lower their meat intake, and the consumer had to come up with some ideas. To help consumers with this task, we also gave them some definition. So, for example, they could use some nutrition claims in terms of fiber, in terms of fat, in terms of salt, in terms of protein, antioxidants, minerals, and vitamins, and they were basically free to possibly add one of them, several of them, or none of them into their new product. And we also gave them a restricted number of meat products, just because we felt that these were the meat products that we could easily manufacture ourselves in the subsequent phases of the project. So they could only choose between the meatballs, the meatballs, the burgers, the sausages, and the nuggets. These were the only choices available. So in terms of results, basically across all of the countries and across all of the different focus groups that we run with all the different ages and groups, basically beef was the base meat that was mostly used by participants to develop healthier meat products. So this is basically the type of meat that we decided to use then for the rest of the project, because we felt that it was obviously the most important for consumers. And the most interesting finding was that actually all of the focus groups, they all use plant-based ingredients basically to make their meat products healthier. Some of them also use reduction of salt or reduction of fat across countries. There on the right-hand side, you can see an example of a product that was created by one of the groups. So it was a 50-50 pork with vegetables, sausage product. So it was with corn, soy, peppers, and so on and so forth. They also came up with, prices and, what kind of claims it had. So it was also a bit of fun for them to develop. Other elements of interest for consumers were packaging, labeling, and shelf life. So especially, for example, for children, they were mentioning, colorful sausages or colorful meat products, or, long shelf life, or maybe frozen products, and so on and so forth. Sustainable packaging, so the least use of plastic, for example, was also mentioned. So after the first study, what we did was we continued with cross-country surveys. And as mentioned, we were supposed to only do one, but then we ended up doing two because of COVID. And then towards the end, I think there was some lifting of restrictions in COVID, and therefore we managed to actually carry out one sensory study where we compared a commercial beef burger, a hybrid beef burger, which was the Tesco one that we saw earlier, and a plant-based burger. We used the Beyond Burger as a plant-based burger. And several outputs came out of this. So obviously there at the top, you have that first experimental work that we did with the linguistic expert in Reading. Then in the middle, on the left-hand side, there is an article on the co-creation, which is basically the study that I just covered now. And then the surveys were also published, the one on the right-hand side in the middle and the one at the bottom. And there were different outputs. I just don't have the time to go through them all now. But this is me and the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, want to reach out, you want some copies of the articles, just get in touch. My email address is just there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simona, for an amazing talk. That was really interesting. I certainly learned a lot myself here about hybrid meat products. That was brilliant. I know there have been lots of questions coming in, so just to remind people that we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So please, if you could pop any questions that you do have, if you could just pop them into the Q&A function there, that you'll see it at the bottom. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Alissa Nolan, our next speaker this afternoon. Dr. Nolan is an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst in the Department of Food Science, who works with her colleagues and students to enhance the field of food science and human health. Alissa believes that understanding factors influencing sensory perception and taste preferences are important in increasing consumption and in the creation of delicious, healthful, and sustainable foods. Alissa has conducted consumer surveys and supported collaborative projects on plant-based foods to understand consumers' motivation to adopt a diet that includes plant-based products, with a focus on sensory attributes and personality factors that are associated with liking and with intake. So thank you, Alissa. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here and to follow on to Dr. Grasso's presentation, talking about the opportunities for hybrid meat products. So I am from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Food Science Department. And for those of you interested, everyone thinks UMass Amherst is located in Boston. We're actually 2 hours west of Boston. So building on our earlier talk, there's a suggestion that blending animal and plant proteins has the opportunity to increase consumer acceptance, just as we already heard that it could be a lower barrier. It's a big step for a lot of individuals to jump onto a full plant-based diet. And these blended products perhaps provide an opportunity for consumers to make a smaller step towards achieving an increase in sustainability of our diet. And she started by presenting on data actually presented in the US, and actually have another data that provides a very similar story. So this group, Food Insight, evaluated or did an online survey with 1,000 consumers in the United States, asking their experience with plant-based products. So in the US at the time of this study, 49% of the participants reported having tried plant-based meat. When asked why or what motivated them to try these products, 41%, so the most popular response, reported that they like to try new things. So they're motivated to try different experiences related to food. Only just under a quarter of the individuals thought that it would actually taste good as a primary reason for trying these products. So not too promising that that taste is going to be an important factor for motivating consumers to try a plant-based product. But what about the consumers that reported not trying plant-based meat? Perhaps not surprising to a lot of us, but the primary reason for why consumers had not tried plant-based products is that they did not think it would taste good. This is going to be very concerning when we know that taste is going to be a driving factor for food choices. And it's going to be really important to understanding or motivating consumers to change their food behavior. But let's take a look a little bit closer at the individuals who have tried plant-based products. What did they think about that experience? So when we're thinking about criticisms of the plant-based foods that these consumers have tried, 70% of them reported sensory attributes that did not meet their expectations when it came to their experience. This included the texture was not like what they're used to in their conventional meat product. They did not like the taste of meat, and it did not taste like the meat product that they were mimicking. So when we're thinking about the primary strategy, that the current approach for creating these analog products is that they're going to mimic the sensory experience. And I think based on what we've already heard and what I just presented, we can start painting a picture that these products are not fulfilling the sensory experience, or that they have this expectation that they're going to taste bad. And this is a problem when we're talking about helping consumers adopt a plant-based diet. There's also other opportunities, which isn't going to be the focus, but I do want to point out that it's not just the sensory attributes that are not meeting consumers' expectations. So a lot of research has been coming out, it's growing every day, suggesting that these commercially available plant-based alternatives are not nutritionally equivalent compared to their conventional product. So some consumers, when they're making a substitution, might expect that they are going to receive the same sensory, the same nutritional profile, and that is not the case. And if we are truly invested in having consumers adopt a sustainable diet, what would that do to their overall diet quality? And there's some data, while more studies need to be conducted, the preliminary data suggests that these alternatives would actually result in a reduced consumption for some required nutrients and an overconsumption for others. So there's definitely an opportunity to improve the nutritional quality and profile of these alternative products that more mimic what they're used to, their conventional products. I also want to highlight a study done by Maya Grease, a visiting scholar here at the University of Massachusetts, who investigated the textural profile of plant-based alternative products compared to dairy yogurts. Really, this study is to demonstrate that these products that are commercially available are not meeting consumers' expectations and not mimicking the sensory characteristics. So the next couple graphs that I'm going to present are actually temporal dominance, where the participants clicked the attributes they were experiencing over a period of eating and swallowing. And we're just reporting the dominant sensation, attribute that was selected at that time. So here we're going to start with 2 of the dairy controls. And what I want to point out is the increase right away of the thickness of the product, followed by the creaminess of this dairy control. And you can see a similar profile for another dairy control product. But what can we learn about the plant-based products that we have? So here we have a plant-based alternative product that was available in the US market. And we can see that the primary attribute for this product was thinness, followed by wateriness. So very different temporal textural profile compared to the dairy yogurts. We can see another example of a plant-based alternative. Of the products that we tested, this one actually was the best at mimicking the temporal dominance profile for these attributes, but we can see that stickiness was an attribute that increased during the experience that might be related to a reduced acceptance. But we can show this and demonstrate this for lots of alternative yogurts that are available in the marketplace. So we want to come back to the opportunities that blending might offer for improving the sensory profile of these products. But there are also opportunities, as I mentioned, to improve the nutrition profile and also the physical characteristics of these hybrid meat products. So for the talks that for the studies that I'm going to present today, we're going to be looking at, are consumers going to be more accepting of these blended alternatives, but also what do we call it? Just as we kind of learned that consumers aren't even willing to try because this idea that these plant-based alternatives aren't going to taste good. So how are we going to address that? So we're going to jump right in with our first study, again, conducted by Dr. Grasso. She, for her study, combined commercially available plant-based yogurt with dairy yogurt. And we used a blueberry yogurt to help mask some of the color differences that are inherent to plant-based products. So for this study, we blended these products at specified ratios and had consumers rate their overall liking and texture profile of these products. Today, we're going to be focusing on two questions from this study. One, does blending help to increase the acceptance or the overall liking of these products and improve the textural profile? And how does labeling influence their overall liking of this product? And to demonstrate our hypothesis or the approach for this, we presented the commercially available plant-based product at 100%, and then substituted that product with a proportion of dairy yogurt. So we presented at 25%, 50%, 75%, and then we had a dairy control. So we're going to jump right into the results. So they rated their overall liking on a 9-point hedonic scale. And you can see the plant-based here at 100%, 75%, 50, 25, and the dairy control. And a highlight from this graph is that we can see that even a substitution at 25%, we're getting no significant difference in liking, meaning that we can successfully substitute a portion of the plant-based with dairy to help improve the overall liking. So already we can see that this product might be a great first step in helping to create a more sustainable product. It is important to mention that obviously the 100% plant-based yogurt is going to be the most sustainable. But in terms of, can we start small and substituting a small amount, 25% plant-based protein to help improve the overall acceptance. But a secondary question from this study was looking at the labeling. So just to kind of walk you through what we were thinking, as I mentioned, consumers already associate plant-based being tasting bad. And we wanted to know how the label would influence their overall liking of the product. We hypothesized that actually presenting with a dairy label would help to improve the expected taste and help to increase the overall acceptance of the product, even though it contained a portion of plant-based ingredients. On the other side, when presented with a plant-based label, we expected that it would actually prime individuals to anticipate disliking the product, therefore reducing the overall liking of the product. Well, let's see what the results said. And so here, all of these samples with plant-based were presented with a plant-based label, except for the dairy control was presented as a dairy label. And so we decided to present the 50% substituted product with a dairy label, anticipating, as I mentioned, that it would help to increase overall liking of the product. We in fact saw the opposite of what we were expecting. With the same product presented as a dairy label showed a significant reduced liking. So we had to go back and rethink our hypothesis and what we were expecting. So when presenting with a dairy label, we realized that we heightened their expected taste. And therefore, when they were presented with a 50% blended product, they were more disappointed. So what they were rating or what their reference in the mind matters. So for the plant-based, the label, they were expecting a plant-based product and perhaps with a 50% dairy added, helped to improve their overall liking. And so for this study, we were specifically focused on plant-based and a dairy label. However, we were presenting a hybrid product. So the next step for this was to actually try different labels that might help to influence their expected taste rating. So is it hybrid, is it blended, is it something else? In this case, had an impact on their overall liking of that product. I want to quickly show that the blending of the samples helped to increase the texture and mouthfeel properties. So for this study, they had rated the visual ratings of these texture properties and in the mouth. And this is just showing the difference in the rating. So in the negative meant that their intensity for this attribute visually was more intense than in the mouth. And we're first going to take a look at thickness. So thickness was more intense as a visual attribute. And we can take a look at our other attributes such as creaminess, sliminess, thinness, wateryness, and stickiness. And there's a lot of data here, but what we're really trying to demonstrate is that as you increase the dairy composition in this product, you help to create a product that is more similar to the control product. So indeed, we can demonstrate that adding dairy yogurt and substituting that in a plant-based product is going to help to improve the texture profile of the product. So in summary for this study, I just mentioned we can improve the mouthfeel, but it also can increase the liking of the product. But that product labeling is going to prime consumers for the expected taste and will drive overall acceptance of the product. So for this, we were really looking at the acceptance of hybrid, but really focusing on the labels of plant-based and dairy. And so now we're going to shift to doing focusing on the label of hybrid. So for this, we looked at doing a choice experiment where we presented consumers in an online survey with 3 options at a time, and they had to select which products they would like to consume. And so they were presented with hot dogs, and they varied in the different information that was provided about each option. So they varied in the protein, so 100% beef, 100% plant-based, and a blend of 50-50 beef and plant protein. They also varied in price. They varied in 3 different levels of fat content, and also were presented in 3 different packaging claims, not including GMO, cholesterol-free, and for a healthy heart. So we wanted to see which of these factors were going to be most important for consumers when selecting their option of the 3 products. And then within the variable, such as protein source, which one was going to be most important for them. So we're going to jump into the results. So we had 459 consumers in this online survey. The primary driving force for selection was the protein source. And then we'll take a look at the utility that it was assigned. So a positive utility would mean a higher value, and a negative utility would be a negative value associated with that. So we can see the highest utility was assigned to the plant protein. So this was important to consumers. 100% pure beef, slightly negative, but the blended option was assigned the least utility within the plant protein source. While the focus of this talk is going to be continue on protein source, we also know that price was the second most important when selecting. And actually the cheapest option was assigned the most utility. But packaging claims was somewhat important for individuals as well as fat content. And so that is important to consider, but for now we're going to focus on the differences in protein source. So here we can see that the intrinsic properties that we presented about the hot dog, so the product related factors, but what are some other factors that are going to drive consumers' choices? So a lot of my research is really interested about the consumer experience and the consumer values and other factors, person-related factors that are going to drive their choices. So we can think about cost, we can think about the taste, we can think about the availability, are all important to understand consumers' choices, but there's going to be other factors. And specifically for plant-based, we're seeing a lot of research coming out with that of how important this is going to be for understanding consumer behavior. So some really common themes that we're seeing across the literature regarding person-related factors or these extrinsic factors are things like how much they value sustainability. Do they have regular sustainability practices? Is it socially acceptable for them to consume a plant-based product, or in this case, a hybrid product? How important is health in their food decisions? But also, what is going to be the environment where they're consuming it? Is it in a restaurant? Are they at home? That sort of environment is going to be important. We also see some literature suggesting food neophobia. Willingness to try new foods is also a barrier. But repeatedly, we're seeing meat attachment show up in a lot of studies showing that willingness or unwillingness to reduce meat consumption is playing a role in their opportunities to try a plant-based product. So for this, we want to compare in our choice-based study how the intrinsic and extrinsic properties might explain some of their choices that they made in this study. So first, we're going to look at beef and plant-based, and then we'll move on to our blended product or our hybrid product. So we're going to start off by looking at the intrinsic factors that we had in our study, so protein, fat, and price. And together, this model explained 43% of the variability in their selection of a beef hot dog. But let's take a look at the extrinsic factors. So thinking about their health, how much they value health, their meat attachment, ethics, and food neophobia. So together, this model actually explained more variability than actual product factors when selecting beef hot dogs. So let's take a look at the plant-based hot dog selection. So considering the same factors regarding the product, the protein, fat, and price, we're seeing a similar relationship, but actually explains more variability compared to the beef hot dog. When we take a look at the extrinsic factors, we're seeing a similar story with a similar or slightly more percent of the variability explained by the extrinsic factors, demonstrating that both the product and the person-related factors are going to be important when looking at selection of these products. But how about these blended or hybrid products? So we can take a look and actually see that these intrinsic factors, protein, fat, and price, explained a larger percent of the variability compared to either the beef or plant-based. So these might be more important when considering the creation or marketing of these plant-based hot dogs. But what about the extrinsic factors? So this was actually surprising to us. We saw that this model was not significant at explaining variability when talking about blended hot dogs. But we wanted to follow up on this relationship here with ethics. So the next slide, we're going to be comparing the ethical values for both selection of the blended and plant-based hot dogs. So when looking at the model, we really are focusing on the social values. So on the left-hand side, we have social values being a significant factor in the selection of plant-based hot dogs. However, environmental values, so sustainability practice, how important is sustainability in diet, not a factor, or moral values is not a factor when considering selection of plant-based hot dogs. And we're seeing a similar relationship when talking about blended hot dogs. But I want to point out that even though social values is significant, it's a negative relationship. This suggests that perhaps these blended hot dogs are not going to be viewed the same way socially. So it potentially could be more socially acceptable compared to a plant-based hot dog. So overall from the study, I really want to highlight the importance of not just the intrinsic, but the extrinsic factors for understanding consumers' behavior, and that we're going to see different relationships between a plant-based and a hybrid product. These are very different products for consumers, and that just because we looked at their selection for a beef burger, for example, or in this case, a hot dog, we might see a different relationship when considering different protein sources. Perhaps for at least the beef and the plant-based hot dogs, the extrinsic factors were more important in explaining the selection of those products compared to the actual product factors, such as protein, fat. However, the blended products didn't have that relationship, but there's preliminary data to suggest that these blended hot dogs might be more socially acceptable for consumers. We also didn't see a relationship with meat attachment, and I think that's huge going forward, that these options could be a stepping stone for those who really attach to meat, that they're still getting to consume their meat, but that these products could be more sustainable and have a better profile than the plant-based products. So really want to summarize that all of these factors are going to be important for future studies. While we're heard a lot about sensory and it's very important, you know, consumers are going to drive this selection, so it needs to taste good. But we need to also consider that these products are going to have a similar nutrition profile or be aware of the nutritional differences when making their selection. The ingredient statement is also going to be important moving forward, and we can consider how different claims and price are going to affect selection. All of these personal related factors and many more are going to be important for understanding selection and potentially really useful marketing tool to these individuals to adopt a more sustainable diet. So as we already heard earlier, there's a gap in the number of sensory studies and consumer studies evaluating not just blended, but overall plant-based products. I mean, there needs to be a greater investment in academia and industry and understanding consumer and sensory attributes of these products. But I think that both of the studies today suggest that there's a promising future for hybrid, that they could potentially be more socially acceptable and an easier change in behavior for many consumers. So that I want to also highlight that this work is done by Dr. Simona Grasso from the University of Helsinki, who did a visiting scholarship with my lab and a collaborator's lab here at the University of Massachusetts. And some of the work was also conducted by my student, Kashmira. And I just also want to give a plug for the Food Oral Processing Conference. The deadline for submission of the abstract is coming up, and that is due on March 19th. So with that, I thank you, and we can move on to our questions.
Thank you so much, Alissa, for another wonderful overview of some of the work you've been doing recently there in UMass. Fantastic. Just to remind people that the Q&A function is open, and please do ask your questions in there. So I'm just going to start off by asking a quick question, Simona, to you. It was lovely to see so much feedback based on your work that was showing the importance of taste. Just as someone who's very interested in taste, it's great to see. One thing I did wonder, you know, you mentioned about some of the different products and how, you know, the consumer perceptions can be so different depending on how they are, I suppose, marketed in a way. And I wondered about the term hybrid. You know, is the term hybrid something that you typically see in these kinds of products? And is that perhaps a term that could be very off-putting to consumers?
Yeah, it's a good question, Emma, because actually I think it relates, it goes back to, you know, how these products are marketed and put into the onto the shelves, because obviously they're not mentioned as, they're not referred to as hybrid, but obviously for the consumer it's a bit confusing because they don't know where they should stand. So obviously they stand in the meat aisle, but it's kind of meat with a healthier twist. So sometimes they tend to have a little section of their own, like at the end of the meat section. But it's a tricky one because I don't think they have a name of their own. They're definitely not mentioned as hybrid. I think it's more of an academic term that is used in the papers. Yeah, I think it goes back to where they are on the shelves and how consumers perceive them. And as long as it's not confusing, they need to find a little space for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that brings me on then to some of the work that you spoke about, Alissa. You had mentioned about the nutrition profiles and things, and you have mentioned, Simona, that in some cases that they could be perceived as healthy and perhaps having a more healthy nutrition profile. So could you comment on that, Alissa?
Yeah,
so
we have
hidden veg products, I suppose. I'll just clarify. So if you've got a product that's being marketed as having hidden vegetables in there, and potentially it has higher fiber and perhaps lower saturated fat and so on, could they be considered more healthy in terms of a nutrition profile?
So I think it's really interesting. I think most of the nutrition comparison that we've done to date is actually comparison of plant-based versus conventional. We don't actually, I was very impressed by all the hybrid options available to you guys. We do not see that as often. But I think that there are some concerns. And I think perhaps the hybrid does address some of those limitations, but we're seeing, these plant-based products have significantly more fat or more fat than what would be expected with plants, and also higher sodium content. So in addition to other vitamins and minerals that might be advantageous for meat products are lacking in these conventional products. But I can't really speak to the nutritional profile of these hybrid products. I haven't actually taken a deep dive in what's available in the market, but I think it has the opportunity. But generally, consumers do have this view that they are healthier, and in fact that they're not necessarily nutritionally equivalent or as healthy in all the aspects that they might think.
Absolutely. And I suppose then there's a few other questions that have come in, and one has come in for you, Alissa. How do you define the textural characteristics used in your TDS work? How do you think we might translate these findings to better convey those expectations to consumers? And that's from Nadia Burns. Hi, Nadia.
Thank you, Dr. Burns, for that question. That work was actually, again, performed by a visiting scholar. So that was actually done in Helsinki. So we, following that study, did work into both countries, so in Helsinki and here at UMass. And we actually found differences, not really surprising, in how consumers were using those words. So they were not trained. They didn't give definitions to consumers on those attributes, but we do know that they use them differently. But in terms of conveying expectations to consumers, if we go with the primary strategy that these products are meant to mimic the conventional products, we're not doing ourselves a service, because we do know that they're not the same. So I think it's setting consumers up to know that these are not necessarily going to be 100% just like the real thing, and be transparent about that, because I think they're not doing themselves a favor by saying they're exactly the same. And clearly we can show both evidence in industry and academia that this is not the case.
Absolutely. And I suppose it struck me when you showed that slide, and then you showed, the difference when you put, the plant-based versus the dairy-based label on there, that you had such a difference then in the liking. In that group of consumers, were they all normally dairy consumers, or did you capture that kind of information about what they normally would purchase?
So for a lot of these studies, we have that challenge, right? We want to be able to present both conventional and alternative products. So these aren't going to be your vegan consumers. They're not necessarily going to be always purchasing plant-based, but we do ask their experience or prior experience or how often they consume plant-based. So not specific, actually in one of our other studies, we actually looked at that, noting that in Helsinki, there's a lot more plant-based yogurt options available. So we came with the expectation that these consumers are going to be more familiar and more accepting of these plant-based products compared to in the US, where most maybe have tried it, many have not. So we were expecting to see a lower acceptance, and when in fact between the two countries we saw no difference. So that's a little bit a roundabout way of answering your question about prior experience. In that case, we did see any differences.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think you're right. It's a very difficult thing to measure in a group like that, because you're not going to get your typical people who are purchasing these on a normal basis to be able to try both. But thank you for that. The next question then is for Simona. So Simona, do you think that it is more valuable and easier to develop meat and dairy alternatives with similar characteristics to the original ones, or maybe to promote new plant-based products that are both highly acceptable and tasty?
Yeah, I mean, some people think that, either you go 100%, vegan and vegetarian, or you don't, or you're a meat eater. I think now people are moving away from that concept, and everybody's more flexitarian. Everybody has more days when, they might eat some meat or they might eat less meat. So I don't think that the two concepts, are basically not cannot coexist. There is huge investment, there is huge effort in developing 100% plant-based, and I'm quite, happy with that, and I promote that. But I also think that, if there is some consumers there, middle-aged people who are not happy to jump onto, Beyond Burgers or tofu, and they're happy with having, 30% mushroom, 70% pork, sausage one day a week, then for me that's a win. And so I think not everyone will move to 100% plant-based, but I think every little step counts. So if hybrids can help in that sense, then I'll be happy with those as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess then this is a question for both of you, and probably looking at the time, it's probably our wrap-up question, but going forward with sustainability and health, do you think there will be an eco label placed on products? I'm going to maybe let you answer that one for now, Alissa, and then we come back to Simona, because I know we're talking about two very different market regions and things as well.
I think this is a really interesting question. I'm guessing we're going to see huge differences across country. I'm seeing that many consumers aren't driven by sustainability, but perhaps we need to change that. My biggest concern actually at the moment is the packaging. So I'm glad Dr. Grasso noticed that lots of participants were describing that they want a sustainable packaging or how much plastic was on it. And so I'd really like to see if there was an eco score, was not just about the product itself, but also included how it was packaged. So that's my thought.
Yeah, definitely. I would be obviously pro, an environmental label that can, somehow guide consumers. However, I know it is hard, to find one label that works and that can give, a very clear and understandable message to consumers. So again, we always go back to, do not mislead the consumer, make the message very clear and very easy to understand. So it's about finding, I think, a balance, but that's the way we'll have to go in the future, I think.
Absolutely. There is one last question. I think we probably squeeze it in. And again, I guess it's related to that, the amount of labels and information that you put in our products. There is a question around whether we think, there's so much already in terms of product labeling. Is there a danger for information overload in terms of potentially helping new consumers to navigate some of these new products?
Definitely, I agree that there is a lot of information already, and the problem is, do consumer look at it? Do consumer understand it? Are consumer educated enough to understand the meaning of it? But sustainability and environmental factors are so important nowadays to guide consumers, and consumer want to know more and understand more and more as well. So I think it's an important piece of information to have there.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I would agree. There are so many different Nutri-scores and various things, but there's such a consumer interest now in sustainability as well. So I do imagine that at some point there will be some sort of eco score on there as well. So just to let everyone know as well that the presentations will be on our YouTube channel at some point. So do keep an eye out for that. And I'd just like to finish by thanking both speakers again today, Alissa and Simona. Fantastic talks, and I think a really, really interesting topic. And I'm sure that you'll have plenty of follow-up questions and things after this. So thank you both again for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, folks.